what is an alien megastructure? And we've spoken about one of them, which is the Dyson sphere. But I'm curious, one, if there is a sort of definition of what an alien megastructure is that you operate with, and whether or not we might talk about some other types of megastructures that might give off technosignatures.
Yeah, I think megastructures is essentially some grand engineering project that has been produced by a civilization. I don't think it has a strict, rigorous definition, but it's something that I think we assume is presumably detectable from afar. And that megastructure could be something on the planet itself. It could be like a space elevator or something, or a tether connected to a space elevator that produces, or an artificial ring system around that planet. We sort of talked a little bit about the idea of Starlink eventually becoming almost like a ring system. The Clark Belt is an obvious place where you might imagine something like that happening. The Clark Belt is the orbit of a geostationary orbit. So there's a good reason why we like to put satellites there. There's actually a huge overdensity of satellites there. The Starlinks are not there. They're in low Earth orbit. But if you go further out, you get to geostationary orbit. And then you have a satellite which sits above the surface at the same location at all times. That's really useful for communication. So we might imagine looking at another planet and noticing that there is an overabundance of material at the Clark Belt location. And that would be extremely suspicious. I think that would have to be a technosignature at that point. There's just no way naturally there's any preference for putting material at that location. And it would essentially reveal the detection of a communication network for that civilization. Other structures could be to fight climate change. Not climate science, climate change. Climate change is obviously a big problem for ourselves, and we're thinking about geoengineering solutions. And one such solution would be to put giant mirrors in space that could potentially block out a large fraction of solar light and cool the Earth down as a result. And the obvious place to put that would be the Lagrange point that sits between the Earth and the Sun. And so again, that's a very well-motivated location. It's not a stable position, actually. It's only metastable, so it requires station keeping for something to stay there. So again, if there's a large collection of material there, then you know that there's someone who's deliberately putting it there, because material just shouldn't hang out there naturally. So I think that's there's actually been some projections of what that material might look like in our data. And there was even a science fiction movie I really love. There's a Canadian movie, it's an independent movie called Clara, where it's about a scientist who has the idea of looking for that signature. And actually, the movie makers worked with Eric Gaidos, who is an astronomer who proposed this idea of how a civilization might put these giant shields in the Lagrange point. And so at the end of the movie, of course, they detect this signature in test data and then start sending radio signals to them. So that's another example. And then, of course, maybe space mining might be another good case to think about.
Space mining.
So asteroid mining.
Yeah.
If you really want to extract all of this plutonium and gold out there, then you might imagine building infrastructure to do so. One of the consequences of space mining, asteroid mining, is that you're probably going to produce a lot of dust. So one of my colleagues, Duncan Forgan, wrote a paper about this with Martin Elvis, who's at Harvard. And they calculated that any kind of space mining activity is likely to produce a huge amount of debris as a byproduct. I mean, of course, anyone who's worked in a mine knows that. There's a huge amount of dust, and it's very bad for your lungs, of course. And so you'd expect the same thing in a solar system. So you'd have solar systems which have an overabundance of dust localized to these belts. And that could be a good signature for some kind of mining activity happening.